I stepped out of my sleek, black limousine, the heels of my designer boots clicking against the pavement. The golden glow of the city lights reflected off the towering buildings, casting long shadows on the streets below. It had been a long day, meetings, negotiations, and closing deals that added another 7 figures to my bank account. I wasn't in the mood for interruptions. But just as I turned to enter my high-end boutique, a small voice stopped me. "Miss, please." I barely spared a glance. A little boy, dressed in rags, stood in front of me. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with dirt, and his eyes, those piercing green eyes, held something different. Not just hunger. Not just desperation. Something else. Something I couldn't quite place. I should have walked past him. I should have ignored him, like I did with every other street beggar who tried to gain my sympathy. But there was something off about this boy. "Please, ma'am, I just need a moment." His voice wasn't whiny like most beggars. It wasn't the voice of someone groveling for money. It was steady,
calm, certain.
and that sent a chill down my spine. I exhaled sharply, already regretting stopping. "Look, kid, I don't carry cash. If you're looking for charity, there's a shelter down the street." "I don't want money," he said, tilting his head. His lips curled slightly, a knowing smirk. "I want 5 minutes of your time." That stopped me cold. 5 minutes? Not food. Not shelter.
Time.
I studied him more closely now, my instincts telling me there was something I was missing. He was small, maybe 9 or 10 years old, but there was a presence about him, a quiet authority, the kind of presence that powerful people had. I shook my head, scoffing at my own ridiculous thoughts. This was just a kid. A homeless, dirty street urchin who probably learned to talk smooth to get people to listen. And yet, what do you want to tell me in 5 minutes that's worth my time? I challenged, folding my arms. His smirk grew wider. "I know who you are, Miss Lauren Carter." I stiffened. CEO of Carter Enterprises. The woman who built a billion-dollar empire from scratch. The one who doesn't trust anyone. The one who believes kindness is a weakness. My blood ran cold. How did he? I masked my shock instantly. "You've been watching the news, huh? That's nothing special." He chuckled, a deep, knowing chuckle that shouldn't have come from a child.
"No.
I know more than what the news says." I narrowed my eyes. "Like what?" He leaned in, his gaze locked onto mine. "Like the real reason you left home at 16. My breath hitched. The street noise faded. The neon lights blurred. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart.
No one knew about that.
No one. I had buried that part of my past so deep that even my closest advisors didn't have a clue. Yet here was this filthy, barefoot child, saying it as if it were just another fact. Who the hell was he? And how did he know? Before I could recover, he took a step back and said, "If you want answers, meet me at the old diner on 5th Street. Midnight. Alone." Then, without another word, he turned and walked into the darkness, leaving me frozen on the sidewalk, my breath coming in short, uneven gasps. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time.
Fear.
And it wasn't of the boy. It was of what he knew. I should have ignored him. I should have let it go. But as I sat in the back of my limo, staring at the city lights passing by, my mind raced.
Who was that boy?
How did he know about my past? By the time I reached my penthouse, my hands were clenched so tight my nails dug into my palms. I had spent years burying my past under layers of wealth, power, and ruthless decision-making. And now, out of nowhere, a street kid had ripped those layers open like they were nothing. It didn't make sense. By 11:45 p.m., I was standing outside the diner on 5th Street. The place was barely standing, flickering neon sign, cracked windows, and a rusty door that groaned when I pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled like burnt coffee and cheap grease. A few night owls sat hunched over their meals, but my eyes locked onto only one person.
The boy.
He was sitting in the corner booth, sipping from a glass of water, like he owned the place. When I approached, he didn't look up, just slid a folded napkin toward me. "Read it," he said. I hesitated before picking it up. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. And then my breath caught. It wasn't just random words or a vague threat. It was a handwritten note from my mother. My dead mother. I gripped the napkin so tightly it almost tore. My heart pounded in my chest. This was impossible. I looked up at the boy, my voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" He finally met my eyes. And what I saw there wasn't a child. His gaze was too sharp, too old. It felt like I was staring at someone who had lived 100 lifetimes. "I told you," he said, tilting his head slightly. "I know things." "This is a trick," I snapped, tossing the napkin onto the table. "Some con artist's sick joke." "If it was a joke," he said, smirking, "why does your heartbeat sound like you've seen a ghost?" I swallowed hard.
He was right.
My body was reacting before my mind could process it. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to regain control. "How did you get this?" His smirk faded. His expression turned serious. "You're asking the wrong question." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You should be asking why she wrote it and why I'm the one delivering it." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" He exhaled, then reached into his ragged hoodie. He pulled out a small, silver locket. I knew that locket. I had seen it before. I had buried it with my mother. My blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. I grabbed the locket from his hands, flipping it open. Inside was a tiny photo, a photo of me as a child. I had never shown this to anyone. Never. I looked back at the boy, my mind spinning. "Where did you get this?" "The same place I got the letter," he said simply. "That's not an answer," I snapped. "It's the only one you're getting," he replied. "Unless you're ready for the truth." My stomach twisted. I was a woman who built an empire by knowing everything before anyone else did. But right now, I knew nothing. For the first time in my life, I felt powerless. And I hated it. I leaned in, my voice low. "Why are you doing this?" The boy studied me for a long moment before finally answering. "Because, Lauren," he hesitated.
His jaw tightened.
"I think you're my mother." The words hit me like a freight train. The air was sucked out of my lungs. "What?" My voice cracked. He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know how, and I don't have all the answers, but—" "No," I shook my head violently. "That's impossible. I have never had a child." He frowned. "Are you sure?" My stomach twisted. I had never given birth. Never. But there was something. A memory. A moment I had spent years trying to forget. I had woken up in a hospital once. Years ago, dazed, confused. Something had happened, but I had never known what. The doctor had just told me, "You were unconscious for 3 days. You suffered severe blood loss, but you're going to be fine." I had been so focused on surviving that I had never asked the right questions. And now, sitting in front of me, was a boy with my mother's locket and my own green eyes. I stood up so fast my chair screeched.
"No."
"You're lying. This is some elaborate scam." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wish it was." The look on his face sent another chill through me. Because it wasn't the look of a con artist. It was the look of a boy who had spent his whole life searching for answers. And I was his last hope. I shook my head, taking a step back. "I need time." "You don't have time," he said. Something in his voice stopped me. He wasn't just saying it as a plea. It was a warning. I narrowed my eyes. "What do you mean?" His expression darkened. "They're coming." "Who?" He hesitated, then said 3 words that sent ice through my veins. "The people who took me." I didn't know what terrified me more, the fact that he claimed to be my son, or the fact that someone was after him. My instincts kicked in. This wasn't just about me anymore. I didn't trust this boy. I didn't believe his story. But I did know one thing. If someone was hunting him, they'd have to go through me first. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I grabbed his wrist. "We're leaving." He blinked in surprise. "Where?" I tightened my grip. "Somewhere safe." And just as we stepped out of the diner, a black SUV screeched to a stop in front of us. The back door swung open, and a man in a suit stepped out, holding a gun. My body moved before my brain could. I shoved the boy behind me just as the man raised his gun. "Get in," the man ordered, his voice sharp. "Not a chance," I shot back. The boy grabbed my wrist. "Lauren, run." He didn't need to tell me twice. I turned on my heel, dragging him with me as we bolted down the street. Behind us, tires screeched. Footsteps thundered. They were chasing us. We darted into an alley, my heart pounding. The boy was fast, weaving through the narrow path with ease. "Who are these people?" I gasped. "The ones who took me," he panted. "They don't want you to know the truth." Gunfire cracked behind us. I cursed under my breath, shoving the boy behind a dumpster just as a bullet ricocheted off the brick wall. This wasn't some street gang. These men were trained, and they were willing to kill. We burst out onto the main road, my mind racing. I needed options. I needed control. A cab sped past. I waved frantically, yanking the door open the second it stopped. "Drive," I snapped, shoving a wad of cash at the driver. "Where to?" "Anywhere but here." As the car lurched forward, I glanced behind us. The black SUV was still there, still following. The boy exhaled sharply. "They won't stop." I turned to him, eyes blazing. "Then tell me what the hell is going on." He hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, he said, "Lauren, I was stolen from you the night I was born." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I stared at him. "That's impossible." "You don't remember," he said, "but it happened." I shook my head.
No.
I had never had a child, never been pregnant. Had I? Doubt crept in. I remembered the hospital stay, the unexplained pain, the doctors being too vague. Could it be true? I looked at him again, really looked. The same eyes, the same bone structure. He looked like me. And then he said something that made my blood turn to ice. "They weren't after you, Lauren. They were after me." The cab sped through the city. The SUV was still behind us. I turned back to the boy.
Why?
"Why would anyone take you?" His expression darkened. "Because of who my father was." My heart pounded. "Who was he?" The boy clenched his jaw. "A man more powerful than even you." That sent a chill down my spine. Who the hell had I crossed paths with? And what had I forgotten? The driver swerved onto a side street, cutting off the SUV. "Where are we going?" the boy asked. "I have a safe house," I said. We needed answers. And we needed them now. But as soon as we stepped out of the cab, the boy froze. His face went pale. I turned to see what he was looking at, and my blood ran cold. A man stood by the entrance.
Tall.
Dressed in black. Smiling like he had already won. "Hello, Lauren," he said. "It's been a long time." I pulled the boy behind me. "Who the hell are you?" The man chuckled. "You don't remember me?"
I didn't.
But something deep inside me did. "Let the boy go," I said. He tilted his head. "Oh, Lauren, you still think you have power here?" A chill ran through me. This wasn't a random kidnapper. This was someone who knew me, someone from my past. And they had just come to collect their unfinished business. The man took a step closer. "You were supposed to forget, Lauren." My hands clenched into fists. "Forget what?" He smirked. "The deal." The air left my lungs. I had made a deal. A deal I didn't remember. And now, after all these years, they had come to make me pay. The boy tugged at my sleeve.
Lauren.
"We need to run." I knew he was right. But this time I wasn't going to run. I was going to fight. I turned to the man. "You want me?"
I said.
"Come and get me." His smirk grew wider. And then, the gunfire started. The moment the gunfire rang out, I shoved the boy behind the nearest parked car, pressing him down as bullets whizzed past us. The man in black wasn't alone. They had come prepared. I scanned the area, my brain working at lightning speed. We were trapped. But if they wanted me alive, that meant I still had leverage. The boy clutched my wrist. "Lauren, we can't stay here." He was right. I wasn't the type to sit and wait to be hunted. I grabbed a discarded metal pipe from the ground, calculating my next move. Then, just as one of the men stepped closer, I struck. The pipe slammed into his wrist, sending his gun flying. He shouted in pain, but I didn't wait. I yanked the boy to his feet and we ran. Bullets chased us down the alley. My heart pounded as we ducked around a corner. "Lauren," the boy gasped, barely keeping up. "There's no way out." But he was wrong. I wasn't just running. I was leading them into my trap. I knew these streets better than they did. Every turn, every alley, this was my city. I ducked into a hidden service entrance of an abandoned building, pulling the boy inside. We crouched low, listening. The footsteps outside stopped. Then, "Lauren," the man's voice echoed in the alley. "You can't hide forever." He was right. But I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. And the second he stepped through that door, I slammed it shut. The old lock clicked into place, trapping him inside. I turned to the boy. "Run." But
Now.
we bolted out the back. And as we disappeared into the night, I knew one thing. This wasn't over. We didn't stop running until we reached a quiet part of the city. The boy collapsed onto a bench, breathing hard. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," I admitted. "Not until they get what they want." The boy hesitated. Then he said, "But what if what they want is you?" A chill ran through me. I had been thinking this was all about him. But what if it wasn't? What if I was the missing piece? I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give them to me. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I swore I would never call again. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Lauren." I clenched my jaw. "I need to know the truth." A pause. Then, "Meet me at the old warehouse. Midnight." I exhaled sharply. It was time to face my past. Midnight came too fast. I left the boy in a safe place and made my way to the warehouse. Inside, an older man stood waiting. He looked at me with guilt in his eyes. "You don't remember, do you?" he said. I crossed my arms. "Then remind me."
He sighed.
"Years ago, you made a deal to protect someone. Someone very important." My stomach turned. "Who?" The man looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Your son." I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. "No," I whispered. "That's impossible." But deep down, I knew it wasn't. "You were unconscious for days," the man continued. "By the time you woke up, they had already taken him." I shook my head violently. "Who did?" The man hesitated. Then he said a name, and my blood turned to ice. The name was one I never thought I'd hear again. Vincent Crow. A man feared by even the most powerful. A man who never lost. And the man who had stolen my child. I clenched my fists. "Where is he now?" The man swallowed. "Hunting you." I turned on my heel. I had spent my whole life running from my past.
But now?
I was done running. I returned to the boy. "We're ending this," I told him. He looked at me, his green eyes full of trust. "What do we do?" I pulled out my phone, made a call, and just like that, the hunt turned into a war. The abandoned dock. Midnight. I stood face to face with Vincent Crow.
He smirked.
"I was wondering when you'd remember." My jaw tightened. "You stole my son." He shrugged. "It was business." Rage burned through me. I'm about to make it personal. Then, without warning, the fight began. I wasn't the scared girl I had been all those years ago. I was a warrior. Vincent's men rushed forward, but I was ready. The boy stayed behind me as I fought for him, for the life we were supposed to have, for the future no one was taking away from us. And when I finally knocked Vincent to the ground, I didn't hesitate. I ended it. For good. It was over. Vincent's empire crumbled. His men scattered. And for the first time in years, I was free. I turned to the boy. He looked up at me, uncertainty in his eyes. "What happens now?" I reached out, gripping his shoulder.
"Now,"
I said softly. "We go home." The penthouse felt different now. Warmer. Less empty. The boy looked around, taking everything in. Then he turned to me. "I never thought I'd have a home." I swallowed past the lump in my throat. "You do now." As he settled in, I asked, "What's your name?" He hesitated, then whispered, "Elias." I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Elias, I repeated. It was a strong name, and it was his. Elias adjusted slowly. But each day, he trusted me more. Each day, he smiled a little wider. And one night, just as I was turning off the lights, he said softly, "Good night, Mom." Tears burned my eyes. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole. I had spent my life building an empire. But the greatest thing I had ever built was the bond between me and my son. This was our beginning. And no one was taking it away from us again.